I've been in Congress 25 years, and I must say the years have taught me a great deal. We don't use the term senior citizen anymore. We say chronologically gifted. But my subject today is the relationship between our culture and our public life, between our culture and politics. It's a topic that has been vigorously debated for years, but the horror at Columbine High School outside Denver earlier this year gave that debate a new sense of urgency. In the wake of the Columbine massacre, Americans of widely divergent views agreed that something had gone deeply, fatally wrong in our national life, and they sensed, correctly in my view, that something involves our culture. Since Columbine, public commentators, religious leaders, and politicians have all related a lengthy list of horror stories, a catalog of decadence of key sectors of American culture. Some may find this cataloging distasteful. I welcome an airing of our cultural dirty laundry, for too many of us prefer to ignore the sewage around us. Being reminded of just how low things can and do get is salutary. Accurate diagnosis of a disease is the first step towards a cure, but I don't propose to add to the catalog of horribles today. Various remedies have been proposed for dealing with the problem of a toxic culture. A distinguished bipartisan group of public figures has called upon the entertainment industry to police itself much more stringently through voluntary, self-adopted measures. Others have gone farther, proposing a reinstitution of censorship. They point out that no civilization in history before our civilization has ever thought it possible that society could tolerate a free fire zone in images and words. These and other proposals for both private restraint and public boundary setting merit the most serious consideration, but I don't wish to address them today. Rather, what I would like to do is take the conversation a little deeper, if I can, by thinking out loud with you about what we mean by culture and what we mean by politics. Then I would like to suggest why, in politics properly understood, culture properly understood counts a great deal. In the post-Columbine debate, culture has largely been identified with certain artifacts, certain things, movies, videos, CDs, websites, and so forth. Those artifacts suggest one possible definition of culture, but they leave us on the surface, I think. Culture is more than the works that are the product of cultural activity. We should probe deeper. The American Heritage Dictionary of the English language helps when it defines culture as the totality of socially transmitted behavior patterns, arts, beliefs, institutions, and all other products of human work and thought. That's a mouthful, but it's a better, richer definition. I would like to propose a simpler form of it for your consideration. Our culture is formed by what we believe, what we think, what we cherish, what we honor. What we believe, think, cherish, and honor is expressed by the books we read, the stories we tell, the poetry we write, the plays we attend, the music we listen to, the paintings we admire, the sculpture we erect, the buildings we design, and so on and so on. Put even more simply, at the heart of culture is cult, what we cherish, what we honor, what we worship. And what we cherish, honor, or worship tells us a great deal about who we are, what we value, and what we are capable of. There's nothing more important that we can know about ourselves and about others, for good or ill, than what we cherish. It's often said by historians that what we call Western civilization is the product or confluence of three great cultural streams: Greek philosophy, biblical religion, and Roman law. Here in Manhattan, Kansas, as indeed across America, we are the heirs and legatees of the cultural heritage created in Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome, more than 2,000 years ago, we really do stand on the shoulders of giants. Now, it's instructive to remember that in each of those ancient cultures, worshiping correctly was thought an absolutely essential part of social life. To cherish the wrong things, to honor the wrong heroes, to worship false gods, this was considered socially lethal in pagan Greece and Rome, as it was among the people of Israel. Remember the great story of Moses coming down from Mount Sinai bearing the tablets of the law, a legal code that would help keep the Israelites from falling back into the habits of slaves. At the base of the mountain, Moses finds the people worshiping a golden calf, a false object of honor. In righteous fury, Moses tears down the golden calf, burns it, scatters the ashes in the water, and makes the Israelites drink the mixture, so they will eventually expel the worship of false gods from themselves in the most literal way. To worship a false god, Moses insisted, was not just stupid, irrational, ungrateful. False worship, a false cult, inevitably led to a corrupt culture, and in a corrupt culture, men and women would begin to act again like the slaves they had been in Egypt, the land of bondage. So here's a fundamental truth of the human condition that we ignore at our peril. If culture is the expression of what we are, what we believe, and what we cherish, if the heart of culture is cult, then to cherish false gods, whether that false god is a golden calf, Baal, Zeus, gangster rap, unbridled material consumption, a culture of violence, is lethal to a life-affirming culture. We have to learn to distinguish false from true objects of veneration. For what we cherish and honor becomes a constituent part of who we are. We become what we honor. Now, what, you may ask, does all this have to do with public life broadly defined and politics more narrowly understood? Everything. We're too accustomed to thinking of politics as a matter of the machinery of government. But Thomas Jefferson didn't make the American claim to independent nationhood on the fact that the British Parliament wasn't working to his satisfaction. No, he staked the American claim to independence on certain self-evident truths that were explicitly moral in character. The human person has an inalienable right to life. That right does not derive from government and is not granted by government. That right inheres in the human person, and governments are bound to respect and protect it. Similarly with liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Now, if the foundation of the American House of Freedom are those moral truths about the human condition, then it stands to reason that the foundation will only remain solid when those truths are understood and lived by the people who wish to be the residents of that house of freedom, the people who are responsible for the house's maintenance. It takes a certain kind of people to make democracy work, and it means that it takes a certain kind of culture to make a democracy work, for the character of a people is in no small part a product of their culture. What we believe, what we think, what we cherish, and what we honor turns out on closer inspection to have everything to do with politics, if by politics we mean tending to and caring for the well-being of the House of Freedom. And so we can extend the definitions in both directions. Politics is a function of culture, and at the heart of culture is what we believe and what we honor. The implication of this equation is both obvious and sobering. A humane culture, a life-affirming culture, is essential for the politics of freedom, and a death-dealing culture, a culture that appeals to the basest human instincts, is lethal to the politics of freedom. American democracy is not, as one constitutional historian famously described it, a machine that will run of itself. It takes a certain kind of people to make a democracy work, a people who understand the self-evident truths that human beings are endowed with certain inalienable rights, a people who knew and who know what it means to pledge one's sacred honor to the defense of these rights, a people who do not worship death-dealing false gods, idols for destruction, as the evangelical culture critic Herbert Schlossberg has called them. In my judgment, the foundations of the American House of Freedom have eroded ominously. They have not crumbled yet, but there are cracks in the foundation of our democracy, and they must be attended to. One way to test the cracks is to survey fellow citizens about the moral status of democracy. Too many Americans, I find, can give only a pragmatic answer to the question, why is a democracy morally superior as a form of government than anything else currently available? Life is complicated, they say, and so is our society. Giving everybody a voice, a handle on the levers of government, is simply the easiest way to keep the lid on. That's the pragmatic answer one often encounters, but it won't work, not at least over the long haul. For in situations of social crisis created by economic difficulties, racial and ethnic tensions, or a grave national security threat, the answer to the questions, why be civil, why be tolerant, why be democratic, cannot simply be that civility works better, unless we have seen in our fellow citizens, and especially those fellow citizens who may be of a different race, ethnic group, or creed, the bearer of inalienable rights like our own, the fabric of civility will shred under intense social, economic, or national security pressures. The breakdown of civility is followed inevitably by the breakdown of public order. We're seeing that in the news reels from Seattle, aren't we? The breakdown of public order is followed by anarchy. And because human beings cannot tolerate anarchy, they will reach for chains in order to regain some measure of control over their circumstances. The cracks in the foundations of the American House of Freedom, in other words, can lead to tyranny. What Columbine reminded us in the most graphic and unmistakable way is there are no guarantees that the American House of Freedom will remain that. Democracy is not a given. Nowhere is it written that the next generation of Americans will automatically enjoy the liberties of its parents' generation. Lincoln noted at Gettysburg that it was an open question whether a nation so conceived and so dedicated could long endure. That's a question that must be answered by every generation of Americans. Democracy is an ongoing moral experiment in a people's capacity to govern themselves. And only a certain kind of people can be self-governing, who have been formed by a life-affirming culture, people who are not, in the depth of their souls, utter pragmatists, people who do not worship false gods, people who are inwardly self-governing in terms of their appetites and aspirations, people who cherish goods worth cherishing and honor heroes worth honoring. When the founders staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the American democratic experiment, they didn't think that free government was inevitable, only that it was possible. And the founders believed that its possibility depended on a certain kind of people, a people who knew that freedom, rightly understood, is not a matter of doing whatever we like, but having the right to do what we ought. Freedom and virtue were inseparable in their minds, and that meant that the House of Freedom must rest on the foundation of a life-affirming culture. As we stand on the threshold of a new century and a new millennium, we have just completed a decade of unparalleled peace and prosperity. These blessings may tempt us to think that the House of Freedom is secure. Yet we know we can't ever be sure that can't ever be the case in any final sense. There are adversaries abroad, and we must take them seriously. In the quest for peace, freedom, and order in the world, America will have to bear a burden of responsibility far into the future. But for the moment, I should like to suggest that the gravest threats to the American House of Freedom and the greatest challenges to our country in the first decades of the 21st century are internal. One of those threats can be summed up in a phrase created a decade ago after the fall of communism by the distinguished political scientist Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski warned that the new threat to the United States and to the West in general was that we might decline into being what he termed a permissive cornucopia. Here in Kansas, where you help feed the world, you know all about cornucopias. What Brzezinski meant by a permissive cornucopia was historically unparalleled material abundance combined with a collapse of personal and public morality. The decadent cornucopia would be another way to express the same idea, that America might become, indeed may be becoming, a permissive cornucopia in which "I did it my way" is the new national anthem, is another reason to think very seriously about the intersection of culture and politics. On the present trends, America seems likely to become ever richer as riches are measured materially. Yet the entire history of humankind suggests that enormous riches are enormous temptations. When we think of that having more is the index of being more, we're in deep trouble. The answer to the temptation of the permissive cornucopia is not to impose asceticism through governmental fiat. The answer is to rebuild a life-affirming culture in which we honor what is honorable, cherish what is truly lovable, believe what is true, think intelligently, and learn from all of that how to discipline and channel our wealth so it frees us rather than enslaving us. A further danger looming just on the horizon is a variant on the ancient Promethean temptation to steal fire from the gods. In this instance, to remake the human condition and refashion individual human beings by manipulating our newfound knowledge of the human genetic code. This new knowledge can lead to great good. It also can destroy us. If the revolution in biotechnology that will sweep over us in the next decade reinforces the idea already present in certain sectors of our society that human life is a commodity like any other, a commodity to be bought, sold, manufactured, or discarded on purely utilitarian grounds, then we indeed are on the doorstep of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, the only culture capable of channeling the explosive potential of biotechnology towards genuine human flourishing is a culture imbued to its depths with a deep reverence for human life. As the eminent bioethicist Leon Kass wrote recently, the most pernicious result of our technological progress, more dehumanizing than any actual manipulation or technique, present or future, is the erosion, perhaps the final erosion of the idea of man as noble, dignified, and precious, and its replacement with the view of man as mere raw material for manipulation and homogenization. Legislation can't alone cope with the revolution in biotechnology. As Dr. Kass continues, important though it is to set a moral boundary here, devise a regulation there, hoping to decrease the damage caused by this or that little rivulet, it's more important to be sober about the true nature and meaning of the flood itself. And that means, in turn, deepening in our culture a profound, carefully nurtured, and unshakable commitment to the sanctity and the dignity of human life. About that commitment, we will inevitably become the creatures, even the slaves, of biotechnology and genetic engineering. Culture counts then for a great deal. Only a certain kind of people can live freedom nobly. Those kind of people are formed by a certain kind of culture. If we want our children and grandchildren to be able to answer Lincoln's Gettysburg question in the affirmative, it is way past time to attend to the cracks in the foundation of the American House of Freedom. This means the reconstruction of our culture through the reconnection of freedom to moral truth. In the 21st century, a century of great possibility and equivalent danger, the character of the American people will be tested as never before. Washington is a city that breeds cynicism, and to invoke the word character is to invite a cynical response. My friends, it's too late in the day for that. Character is destiny and has been since the Bible, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. The character of our people, of those who lead them and those who interpret public affairs for them, is the foundation, is the heart and soul of American democracy. And in this closing year of the century and the millennium, let us try to discipline our common talent for cynicism, to recover a sense of the mystery and wonder of life, and to rededicate ourselves to the renewal of American democracy through the renewal of American character. Living freedom nobly means that we all must avoid the worship of false gods. In doing that, we can give this nation a new birth of freedom, the kind of freedom for excellence that made the United States a light to the nations, a bright city on the hill, the last best hope of mankind. Thank you.